Is only going to cover the distributive property when we're solving linear equations. So if you understood the distributive property in section 1, you probably would want to watch the other video. If you struggle with the distributive property, you have come to the right place because it is not that easy to get at first, but when you understand it, it's pretty straightforward. So the idea of the distributive property comes from problems like this, 12 times 8 or 13 times 6. And when you were in 6th or 7th grade in my class, we worked on practicing a strategy to solve these problems quickly by breaking the number 12 up into 10 plus 2. And then we took each of these numbers times 8. We would do 10 times 8 plus 2 times 8, which is 80 plus 16. Which means this answer is equal to 96. We also did problems for like 13 times 6. We would take 13 and break this up into 10 plus 3, and we'd multiply each number times 6. So we do 10 times 6 plus 3 times 6, which gave us 60 plus 18. So 13 times 6 is equal to 78. And this process right here in the middle is the distributive property. When we involve equations, we have to use a strategy to get through it. But if we look at this equation right here, what we did is 8 times 10 plus 2. This equation over here, we did 6 times 10 plus 3. If we replaced one of these numbers with an x, we're still doing the distributive property, but we now just have to do it in a little different strategy. So let's look at a problem that actually has an x in it. Now, I don't ever know why this order gets messed up, but we're going to try to get it in the right order here, and that's totally fine. So that's okay. We can leave it there for now. But right here we have the expression 2 parentheses x plus 2. Before we do anything else, I want to make sure to remind you that if there is no operation there, we are going to be multiplying both numbers by 2. But what that actually means we have to do is we're taking everything in the parentheses twice. So if we're taking everything in the parentheses twice, it looks like this. X plus 2 plus x plus 2. Each term 2 times. Each term 2 times gives us 2 x's and a positive 4. If you remember from the first section's video, the shortcut in that process is to do 2 times x, which is 2x, and 2 times 2, which is positive 4. If you notice, I got the same answer in both of these strategies, so one is not necessarily better than the other. But we can also think about it with algebra tiles. We have 2 times, and if we remember algebra tiles, this is an x, and this is a positive 1 for each of these. And so what we're doing is we're doing 1x and 2 positive 1 chips twice, which becomes 2 x's and 4 positive 1's, which when combined together gives us 2x plus 4. And if you noticed, all 3 ways gave me the same answer, and it's just a different way to think about the strategy. Now, for the rest of this video, I am going to be doing the shortcut strategy here at the top. But by all means, if you work it out like this or even think about the algebra tiles, I have no problem with that process at all. So let's look at each one of these individually. We're going to start with the problem up here on the left. Now, first we have to identify there is no equal sign out here, so we cannot solve for x because we don't have an equation. Need an equal sign for an equation. So we are just simplifying using the distributive property. So I'm going to distribute the 3 into both of these terms inside the parentheses. So I'm going to write it as 3 times x, and then 3 times negative 2. 3 times x, 3 times negative 2. Well, 3 times x is simply 3x. And then this is where it gets a little bit tricky. We're adding a negative 6. But if you remember your positive and negatives, the negative is obviously going to beat up the positive. So this simplifies to be 3x minus 6. These two answers are mathematically the same, but the answer down at the bottom is going to make your life a million times easier. So I would definitely do it that way. Let's look at the next one here. I'm going to distribute a negative 2 this time. So I'm going to do negative 2 times x, and then we're going to add negative 2 times positive 1. Negative 2 times x is simply negative 2x. Then negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. And I'm going to once again use the same strategy I used before. And we are done. In the top right, then, I'm going to distribute the 8 into both terms. And now I'm going to go and take that shortcut step. I'm going to do 8 times 1 is just 8. If I think of Ann's method, this is 1a. So I'm going to do 8 times negative 1, which is going to give me 8 with the variable behind it. Now the bottom one down here, this is about as tough as we can get. And it's still not too bad. Negative 3 times x is negative 3x. And then negative 3 times negative 2, two negatives multiplied together give us a positive 6. Got to be very careful with those negatives here. Now let's start solving a few problems using the distributive property. For this problem here, we now have an equal sign, so we can actually solve this problem. First thing I'm going to do, we have to get rid of the parentheses on the left side, so I'm going to distribute the 2 to both terms inside. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times 1 is positive 2. And that is equal to 4. And now I can solve it just like I did before. I subtract 2 from both sides, which gives me, on this side, 2x, and on the right side, positive 2. Now I'm going to divide both sides by 2 to get the answer of 1x equals 1. Now, the distributive property is actually a lot easier to check because when you plug it back into the equation, it actually is only one step. So I'm going to go 2 parentheses, 1 plus 1, and that's equal to 4. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is equal to 4. So we are correct. One of the really nice things about the distributive property, it's very easy to check your answers. So, one last problem here. Let's do the distributive property once more. Negative 3 times 1b is negative 3b. Negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6. Got to be very careful of that step. And this is equal to 0. Now, I'm going to solve this just like I've been doing before. I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides of the equation. And I'm going to draw my line down the equal sign. I kind of forgot to do that right away. This is equal to 0. So I get negative 3b equals negative 6. And now I am going to divide both sides by negative 3. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is positive 1b. Negative 6 divided by negative 3 is positive 2. And my answer is 1b equals 2. To check my answer, I go negative 3, parentheses, 2 minus 2 equals 0. Well, 2 minus 2 is 0, so I go negative 3, parentheses, 0, equal to 0. That is a true statement. As always, if you have questions, please let me know anytime. We also have a few assignments that are dedicated just to the distributive property, so we can definitely work on those.